All right, welcome everyone. My name is Kat Lynn and I manage Universum's marketing for the Americas. I have my colleague Paul O'Shea, Universum's head of consulting on the line. So Paul, I'm going to unmute you now and you can kick things off whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Kat, and good afternoon, everyone. And before I get started, I just want to say to anyone joining from the Northeast or Midwest, hope you guys are doing okay and are safe, despite the recent heavy snow. So look, thank you everyone for joining. It's great to be on the line with you today. As Kat said, my name is Paul O'Shea, Head of Consulting for the Americas at Universum. Look, it's pleased to see the great selection of companies and countries represented here today, so I'm honored to have this time with you. I'll recap the purpose of the webinar in a moment, but I do want to say that there may be elements that I do not cover in the content today, and if I do fail to address anything throughout the session, please don't hesitate to send a note to the team here, and Kat and I will try to address any areas that we omit in real time for you. So I really wanted to encourage everyone to participate with any questions in real time for the benefit of all the other participants, rather than saving your questions to the end if you are comfortable with that. So please just, again, send a quick note to Kat and we will try to address them as we go through. I have about 30-35 minutes of content that I can hopefully get through for you today, and then obviously time for questions at the end. So with that, I hope you find the session interesting, and here we go. Thanks, Kat. So just a quick recap, and you would have seen this in the webinar preview. For many employers today, you know, the recruiting season is crucial, and for many people on the line today, your role is about having this, your KPI is about delivering this new talent year in, year out. And it's, you know, it's a very busy season, it's very stressful. But what we're hearing from the clients that we engage with is that a lot of companies are finding that success is becoming more elusive. And there's a number of reasons why. And they're beginning to ask a lot of questions, especially around the return on their investment, which is kind of new language that's really come in recently. I think for a lot of people who are now compelled to justify both their budgets and their activities. So what do they need to change is kind of the question to get better return from the funds that they've been allocated by school. One of the other key things I wanted to touch at the beginning, as well as in paragraph 3 there, is that, you know, school selection, in my experience with clients, can be very emotional because of the alumni, the people that may have gone to a specific college, but also the relationships that can be built over time. And I don't want to discount the value long-term of these relationships. They are paramount, and they can take a while to change. But it is important, I think, for companies to begin asking some hard questions, especially as the environment gets more competitive. The landscape becomes more challenging. Justification for investment is always becoming, it's always a critical question that people are asked. So the key thing is, how do we gain some new competitive edge in how we assess where we go, or build a school strategy that will deliver success for a company over the next 5 to 10 years. So I guess one of the key premises for me is let data and insight be your foil. You know, when faced with a lot of senior leadership meetings or executive teams where you're in to explain what your activities are, I think it becomes paramount for us to approach this not with anecdotes, not with assumptions, but with data and insight, because God knows you will be challenged quite heavily to justify your approach. And I think that's how we've become the foil, if you will, for our clients internally, is by helping arm them with the data they need to be able to make objective decisions, and just removing emotion from the equation and having a very honest discussion based on fact on one of the most critical parts of your business, which I think they really do appreciate. So does it all come down to where do we go? Is it a decision quickly between Michigan State or Purdue? Is it between McGill or Toronto? Is the question about, is it Arizona State or Penn State? Is this the key question, or should it be something else? And, you know, I think the reality is that most people start with this question. Most conversation is, where should I go? And I really don't think many companies can fully justify the answer to the question, but we have to make decisions based on information available. And I submit that we need to take a pause here and, as a group, start with a different question, which is, who do we need? With that, I'm going to hand over to Cash. She's going to run a quick poll if people would like to participate.
Thanks, Paul. So you should see pop up on your screen a quick question, and we would love for people to vote. This will be anonymous, but it'll just kind of give us a sense of, in the room, how many schools you're recruiting at physically. So we're not talking about virtual recruiting or anything. It's at how many schools do you have a physical presence. So we'll just give people a couple minutes to finish voting, and then we'll share the results back with you just to give a sense of the people on the line where things are at. Looks like about 3/4 of the people have voted, so I'll just give it another couple seconds.
And thank you everyone for participating. There'll be a number of these as we go through, and hopefully we'll be able to share back the insights for you as well that add some value and perspective of what your peers are faced with.
Okay, I'm going to close it now, and we will share the results. Okay.
Okay. Very interesting. So definitely 10 to 25 seems to be the predominant amount, which is still a very solid amount of schools, and 1/5 of companies looking at 25 to 50, which is significant. That's very, very interesting. Thank you very much for participating. We will continue to feedback all of the insights from the polls as we go through.
Okay.
Thank you, Kat. Just move on to the slide. So the big thing is questions. What are the questions, the most common questions that we get from clients? So I'm just going to run through a couple of these, and hopefully they will resonate with you. So Kat, if you just want to proceed, we will start listing these up. You know, we got less than 10% of our hires last year from half our target schools. What is wrong? Critical question. Every time I even mention evaluating our school list, it becomes emotionally charged discussion, and we never reach a conclusion. One of the most topical one is, you know, we're transforming as an organization. We need to evolve, and we need to drive greater uptake of STEM talent, but we don't know where to start because it's not been a traditional part of our business. You know, it's just been a few years since we evaluated our school list. We've been doing the same thing year in, year out, but I want to know what best practice is, so please help us. And, you know, one of the ones I really enjoy is I've been going to the same schools for the last number of years, but, you know, in the last 2, I've noticed my yield has been declining, and I can't definitively explain why. I think the last one is, you know, again, our diversity. We have an aspirational goal to be a more diversified organization, but we continue to miss our goals each year. How do we change that? Now, this is just a selection of the questions that we get. It's not meant to be exhaustive. But what I want to submit is that these 3 questions, or these questions sit in one of these 3 buckets typically. It's how are my current schools performing, which comes down to holistic evaluation. The next question is around, you know, do I need to consider adding new schools? So it's a question of addition, and that brings a whole new set of challenges. And then finally, it's do I need to reduce my school list, which typically comes down to the question of ROI and maximizing our investment. But all of these are symptomatic of a greater question, which for me is, does my company have a target school strategy that is based on a 1 to 3, possibly 5-year time frame that will enable my organization to attract, confidently find and attract the required talent based on future needs of the organization? Now, the reason I feel this is critical is most organizations will have a strategic plan. They will be assessing the macro landscape constantly. What is going to influence the future positioning of our organization? Where is the talent people component of this plan? And I hope most of you do have it in place, but I suspect there are a lot of companies where it still hasn't become one of the more critical branches of that strategic plan. So, some of the key questions that we're going to address today really fall into about 5 buckets. First is, you know, most simply, who do we need? And that's really about looking internally. Secondly is, where should we focus? Which is, where should we go? And I think this is where most companies typically come in, is where do we go? But I submit that due diligence internally is more critical. The last three are really around, well, what's important to this talent group, especially when it gets down to a granular level. What is it that they value? What motivates them? What message should we be, putting out there that's authentic and credible? And then how do they want to be communicated with? Because the landscape of, media is now so fragmented for talent in terms of where they're getting their information, whether it's physical one-on-one or Twitter, whether they're following a news feed. But it's how you engage to make sure that your message is reaching the right talent that you want to reach. And ultimately, it all comes down to measuring. But I want to focus on the first two. Who do we need to attract and retain to ensure the future success of the organization is the most critical question in my mind. And it needs to be based on a review of both our internal recruitment metrics to date. It needs to be long-term focused. How is our organization going to need to evolve and change in the new economy? And what people, what talent, what resources do we need to fill these roles to enable that success to continue? It also needs to be granular. It needs to really go below, we need 100 engineers, industrial engineers, or we need 50, computer scientists. Because your organization now needs to also have platforms around, inclusiveness, whether it be diversity. And the talent population that exists in the marketplace will also play a key role in what you can and who you can recruit. So you do have to be specific about subpopulations, even at a more granular level than maybe we have traditionally done. And I would also say just to be a little bit realistic, because it is competitive out there, and we have to be mindful of who we're chasing. The next piece then is really where do we go? So the question I had submitted at the very beginning is, do we start looking for talent before we have properly defined what talent we need? This is, I think, one of the first steps companies do need to go through. Most companies come to us asking to either evaluate, drop, or add new skills, all based on potentially the same demand plan as the year before. Very much a bit of a copy and paste activity, without truly taking the time to perform their own internal due diligence. So sometimes this can be symptomatic of a reactive response to potentially a poor recruiting year, which is really unfortunate, but this is where internal stakeholders that depend on you do not get the pool of talent they need. So the balance between over and under supply is very difficult, and we all appreciate that it is very complex. But it's certainly made easier by having a well-documented and detailed demand plan. So contingencies and offer rates can be adjusted depending on acceptances in real time. So ultimately, what does your target school strategy plan need to achieve? It needs to optimize the equation of talent supply and talent demand. Talent supply based on what's available in the actual physical marketplace. And unless you have a very, very good understanding of what that is and where it is, you may not be going to the right well to get the water that you need. Talent demand is obviously by looking at your internal business, as I said, by division, speaking to the key people managers, general managers. What talent do you need for the future to make their divisions, organizations grow and be successful going forward? And it must be linked to the company's overall strategic plan. So we're going to stop for a quick poll after this again in a second, but firstly, I want to talk about, your break-even point. And I touched on this in the seminar, which is around the challenges today. We're in an environment that costs are increasing year on year. The key question that a lot of our clients are asking us now is, how do we evaluate the ROI from our campus recruitment? Budgets are always under scrutiny, and many companies are seeing declining yields. So we see the situation a lot more now, where companies are asking, what is my break-even, and can it be just move forward? You'll see the other side of that equation is cost increasing, yield declining. Now, what troubles me is that relationships are intrinsically very important in campus recruitment. Alumni and people who have come from campuses that have performed really well in your organization are very, very important. And can it be just move forward one more? There is a key question of, is it a strong campus relationship we need, or is it strong ROI metrics? And I pose it this way because sometimes what I hear is that the relationship starts to blur the actual financial benefits of continuing to go to a certain school. And I think it's important to be strong and ask these questions, but in a very data-driven way. There's no doubt that, as I said, relationships are important, alumni are critical, but if the yields are declining, then we just cannot simply keep going back to the same well, paying more money, but for a reduced level of yield, basically making our cost to recruit higher every year. But we should seek to use that relationship, seek to use those alumni to help diagnose what the issues are and help with remedial action. If the reality is, as we are seeing more and more, new competitors are entering the marketplace, new competitors are coming to our campuses, and it's leading to a potential dilution of our available talent pool, we need to figure out what our reaction is going to be. So my kind of challenge is relationship cannot continue to trump performance, and hopefully what we're going to share with you today is the ways that you can help show that in a very factual way so that it becomes an honest, objective discussion. You had a poll, Kat, for the team?
Yep, so we're going to launch another quick poll. Again, if you could just take a couple minutes to vote, we'll share back the results. So this next question is, what is your estimated average investment when it comes to your campus strategy, investment per school? And there's a couple options on the screen, and if you can just take a couple minutes to vote. Again, this is anonymous. We'll just show the results in aggregate just to get a sense of the people on the line. So it looks like just over half have voted. We'll give it a couple more seconds here. Paul, I think this is another good place to maybe pause. If people have questions so far, just to remind you, we will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so you can use the questions tab in the chat box and enter them at any time. Okay.
Thank you, Kat.
Sure. And we'll just close it right now. So if you haven't voted, just take a couple more seconds. Okay, so the results should be showing on your screen.
Incredibly, still very significant investments per school. And given the numbers we saw before in terms of number of schools visited, when you start doing the math, these are large sums of money. So I guess we absolutely empathize in that you have control over significant budgets, and you need to make sure that those are optimized. Obviously, different organizations may have exponentially greater, but again, scale does come into play here, and that's one of the elements I do want to discuss later on in terms of kind of being pragmatic about our approach, but that's very interesting to see the investment per school. So it's an expensive activity, and even justifies more the reason why we need to get it right. So Kat, we'll just keep moving forward if there's no questions. So why is it more critical now to have a school strategy? Look, from all the conversation we're having, and I no doubt you're reading it yourselves in literature, the returns from our hiring investments seem to be diminishing in terms of the cost per recruit start to increase. But also, I guess more worryingly, is every failed effort, every person you take to the position of making an offer, if they decline, it's pretty much a sunk cost to a large degree. So I think the pressure on companies today to improve conversion rates, I think that will become a key goal going forward for most companies, especially if they want to sustain the levels of recruiting that they currently have. Now, business requirements are changing. This, for me, largely driven by the impact of technology on almost every organization. And for many, it's becoming more critical, and people are at different levels of their understanding of how it will transform their businesses, but also how to start considering recruiting this different talent profile that they may have not been as engaged with before. So I feel that that's another critical reason why having a strategy built around your talent needs is even more paramount, especially when some other large behemoths with great brand equity and mind share awareness already competes for such talent population. The other one for me is that, the traditional reliable pipeline of talent for certain industries or sectors is changing. And we see that with the student preferences information that we get in our research, and also the career goals that we see coming through. And, combining that with the increased use of social media, Talent today on campus, they can look more broadly at different industries and different employers. And that's happening more and more, and we see it in our data where the consideration set's expanding. So therefore, your pipeline is weakening, and it's becoming harder than ever for companies to secure the right talent for their organization, or indeed top talent at the campuses they've traditionally gone to. So we cannot deny the changes happening in the marketplace. Fourth is, new sectors starting to ramp up their recruitment. And that means new competitors potentially looking at the schools where you've historically been successful at reaching your quotas, but now they're coming in and offering themselves as potential employers. And suddenly, that does have a huge impact in terms of disruption for our predictable talent pipeline, which is now, beginning to decline, and begs the honest question around what are we going to do to change it from a fact-based point of view. And finally, I think everyone will be aware that recruiting will continue to evolve based on social media and now virtual recruiting that is going to complement a traditional presence. So one of the other dimensions to the work we do is the criteria that are commonly used by clients to determine the school they go to. Now, I don't want to profess that this list is exhaustive. This is a sample of criteria that I've come across, and I'm sure there are others, but these are what are generally put forward, and it's also not uncommon for these criteria to possibly be maybe a little bit outdated, or possibly weighted in a way that reflected 3 to 5 years ago, and possibly not reflecting how important they are to the future design of the organization going forward. So I think it's always good to step back and evaluate, well, what are the key drivers of school choice that make most relevance and sense to us as an organization to achieve our recruiting goals. Now, there are definitely many more elements that you can select, and it is truly up to you, and it's very unique in terms of how you weigh these variables that optimize your ability to attract the right talent for your organization. This is not meant to be generic, one-size-fits-all, and I have kind of apportioned each element to reflect, in my view, the common prioritization that I've heard. So quality typically comes up as being very, very important, followed by quantity. But in the upper right-hand quadrant, you have like investments. How invested are we in the school potentially? How strong are the relationships that we have with the Career Services Center, or with the professors who lead coursework that speak potentially to our organization in their classrooms, which is huge branding for us as an employer of choice. So these things can have profoundly different impacts on your school selection. What's important is that you define them. And I would also challenge those listening that this selection of criteria, the weights will differ based on the target population you're looking to attract. So if, in the next 12 months, there's a recognition that we want to recruit, a higher degree of STEM talent, and ideally female and diverse STEM talent, then our prioritization in terms of where we choose to go might be different, because our existing relationships and existing campuses might not fulfill the available talent. So suddenly we're looking for diversity first, and we're looking for quantity, and then we're looking for quality. So again, this is very much dynamic, not meant to be static, but for you to take away, and ideally in a really good open session with key stakeholders, discuss, review, and evaluate so that you can build your custom set that makes most sense for you and drives the optimization of your recruitment going forward. And I know we want to ask a poll here as well quickly, Kat, so I'll hand it over to you.
Yep, thanks, Paul. So we basically want to pose the question to you, which criteria is most important to you when you're talking about your school strategy? So we were only able to list out a couple here, a couple that Paul touched on, quality, quantity, relationships, and past success. But if there are others that we, maybe are on the slide or aren't covered at all, please, write that into the chat box and we can read some of those out loud. Just to get a sense of the broad perceptions.
Yeah, I think the point here for us is really to get a gauge of what you as actual employers feel is most critical, and if there's something that is potentially new that you might want to share, or at least put up for consideration. The other critical piece for me in this journey that we've gone is it's critical to do it obviously in conjunction with you, but to bring some realization to the process, because there's no doubt that we could choose the school or program quality as the number one criteria, but that also presents its own set of challenges and circumstances in terms of who you end up competing against on those campuses. And this comes up quite frequently with either an Ivy League campus or one of the most prestigious state schools, is that a lot of companies feel challenged in terms of the competition. You may not be as big as the other guy, so it's what do we do? And the answer is you have to do what's right for you. I was going to use the analogy of boxing, that there's different weights, and I'm not saying you can't punch above your weight, because I think we see it all too frequently, but you should definitely bring a level of realism to, if you are going up into the heavyweight division and you're a welterweight, and I hope you get the analogy of boxing weights, it can be a struggle, and there are reasons why they can achieve a greater disproportionate outcome. And the other, I think, epiphany for a lot of companies I talk with is there can't always be a guarantee that the talent that you find at those most prestigious schools fit you as an organization. So other companies' best fit talent may not be your best fit talent, and you have to trust that. And you trust that by knowing what you stand for as an employer, and that's knowing your employer brand and knowing what your EVP is very clearly. Now, what's interesting here is quality coming up so much. So obviously having the available pool of talent drives a lot of efficiencies. That's what we hear from our clients, is that it drives a good ROI in terms of efficiency, because you can kill a number of disciplines with one stone. So if there's multiple faculties on a campus and there's a lot of available talent, it's still viable for you to be competitive and still get good candidates. So completely understand that. Past success coming up very highly too, which is good. The challenge I would throw to the audience is past success of the last 12 months, I definitely concur, very, very good correlated driver of future success. But I've seen companies look at success for the last 3 to 5 years, and I would submit that, things change quite a lot in terms of both available talent, program quality, and your requirements. So I think in this very dynamic world, I would not look too far back. I would definitely take the last 12 months. But I think it's very interesting that you put that forward. Definitely agree. It's where you've got investments. It's where you've got traction already. It's where they know your brand name. So I think very good feedback. Thank you, everyone. Kat?
Yeah, sure, Paul. Just before we move on, just wanted to throw out some of the write-ins. So locations coming up a lot, diversity, yep, as well as you mentioned, culture fit has actually come up quite a bit in the write-ins.
Yeah, so absolutely take location, and funnily enough, we can do some very nice analysis on that to kind of use it as a variable in the impute of what schools might be graded higher or lower than other schools for selection. Cultural fit, I think that's tantamount to. The challenge is having as independent an assessment of that as possible. But we definitely value that. We use it as part of the work that we do, as best we can incorporating it, because we do track the preferences of students and what they aspire for, and if there seems to be a lot of commonality between what the employer offers and what a student population is saying they value, then that can be a component variable that we can use in the mix. But that's very interesting. Thank you very much for contributions there, everyone. So, for me, and I hope that you've seen a bit of the journey here in terms of where we're going. It's less opinion and it's more fact. And for us, it's really about integrating the supply side, metrics and the demand side metrics, and really segmenting your schools then based on the role they serve in your school strategy. So, I've just broken them into three buckets. One is, your foundation schools. So you should be getting the bulk of your talent base from there, but you still do need to keep it current. It needs to be audited every 1 to 2 years, just to make sure that we're on top of our market share, our conversion rates, our yield rates. Are there new variables coming into the mix that we need to account for to explain in a diagnostic way both what happened and why, and what we're going to do differently to offset going forward. The next tier would be your supplementary, or I also consider your experimental schools. They may be schools that they've been on the periphery. They allow you the buffer to manage either excess supply demand or lowering of demand year on year. Because again, it's going to be a moving target in every organization in terms of that stream of either interns or new hires that you need. So that for me might be 10 to 15% year on year. And then I think what's really becoming very crucial for organizations is the virtual campus strategy, and where we choose to have more of a virtual presence to reduce our overhead costs, any direct physical engagement costs, but we can have a really high efficiency from getting a virtual presence in the realm of which these students are very, very comfortable. And it really removes a lot of barriers to entry that may have existed in the past. So I definitely want to make sure that every company on the line has already considered or has an approach. And we work with companies all the time to design how they would activate and engage from a social point of view. So key messages: role. Define the role of the school and segment your schools in a way that make it rational, logical, and you can associate KPIs against them. Set the performance expectations of what you want to achieve from those schools and their portfolio. But most importantly for me, which I really love, is you can now have performance-based investment. So if your school does deliver its quota, and if it does deliver high-quality talent, you continue to get your funding, or potentially we might start ramping up your funding because you're having success. As opposed to, we have a great relationship, but we've seen declining year-on-year yields over the last 3 years. So the original phrase I had was that good relationship with that school, but poor judgment on our part, because I don't think we're getting what our contract kind of would say we should be getting. And we need to reassess that and definitely have a positive conversation and use the alumni network we have and the relationships to see if we can change the dynamic. But if we can't, we have to seriously reassess what's causing the deterioration and do we need to select a new location to go to. And I kind of want to bring it all back to, and this is a very simplified slide. I mean, again, this is not rocket science. We've discussed doing the internal audit and really looking at the future demands of your organization from a talent point of view before you go anywhere else. So understand who you need, who are going to be the game changers for your organization, because they may not be the same as every other company. However, there definitely will be probably a lot of overlap between who you need and what your direct competitors need. But then we've looked at where they are and understanding at a granular level, where these populations are. And not only the macro, there's engineers there are liberal arts, there are business majors, there's actually subpopulations. How many Hispanic liberal arts students who are female are at that campus? Because that's the talent I would really like to bring into my business, because they bring a diversified perspective, they bring a great qualification that I think is really different to what we've had before. I want that talent. But God knows, I don't know where they are. So, figuring out where you need to go based on who you define you need, not the other way around. When it comes to, the what, that's probably the area that we also work most strategically with our clients in terms of the employer branding space. Because now we're moving into the area of brand and marketing-centric activities tied to what motivates this target group that you define and what do they value in an employer, and translating that into key messages that will positively influence them. And then finally, the last piece is really about how best to reach and engage these individuals, because you have to have cut-through. You have to be able to develop that employer brand equity so you can start filling your funnel with the people that you need, but they have to be aware of your brand. And again, being physically present is great. Having a virtual presence, it's a great way of reaching and creating awareness of your brand, but you need to have a message that is built on an EVP proposition that is compelling to want them to consider asking more questions about who you are. And then lastly, it really is all about measuring what you do. What gets measured gets done. And I think there's been a real positive push from a lot of people I engage with about getting more measurements in place. So maybe in a few years ago, there was maybe less, but today the pressure to justify, the pressure to be more diagnostic, the pressure to have metrics linked to investment are warranting this whole new pressure on measuring everything we do. But again, having KPIs in place, they're good and bad indicators, but more importantly, they're diagnostic tools that allow you to make the right next decision as opposed to not making the right choice going forward because you don't have any metric benchmark to assess. So it's a difference between, as the analogy our CEO has here, having a bucket over your head and just trying to decide where to go, but not really having any clue where you should be going. So let's remove that bucket, measure the key elements that are going to drive future success, learn from those metrics by diagnosing where we're weak, where we're strong, and implementing the right strategy going forward. And next slide, Kat. So I did want to end with some key takeaways before we have some final questions. First one is, I think, very transparent. It's using data and facts to bring objectivity to this very challenging and can be emotionally charged issue. So I think I've hopefully shared with you the data sets that you can use in a very compelling way. Second, look inward first. If you do not know yourself as an organization, and if you're not close enough to the business leads to understand what their 3-year vision is for their departments, their functions, what macro issues might be affecting the organization, if you don't know that, you can't really go and affect a strategy that's going to meet the demands. And this leads to one of the other challenges organizations I see is a misalignment between talent supply and talent demand. And there's probably nothing more frustrating for both parties, because you're doing it and succeeding at your goal. Unfortunately, we probably haven't defined, based on enough stakeholders been involved, what the correct goal should be. Number 3, and I think I've alluded to this, and this is kind of one of the more anecdotal pieces, is do we want to have a good relationship at a school, or do we want to have a good performance? They're not mutually exclusive. You can have both. But I think too often I hear we have a great intrinsic relationship, but we're not having great performance, but the relationship seems to trump performance. I would challenge you to bring your data to your defense, let it be your foil, and say, well, we're having poor yields, we have a good relationship, you help me with your relationship to fix the yields. What do we need to change? And if we don't see a change in 12 months, we need to redeploy investments elsewhere. Get granular. Again, I think a lot of companies probably start with the right mindset and start at a level about diagnosing who they need, but I think in tomorrow's day and age and in the future, where the segmentation of the population is so much more important, especially to reach in a meaningful way, you do need to get more granular, and I think measure your performance at that more granular level. That will definitely help you figure out where you're succeeding and where you're not. Another key takeaway from me really has been be pragmatic. I mean, I think every company on this line knows in their heart of hearts that the best talent that you've brought into your business may not fit somewhere else, and I'm sure they'll tell you. They've either worked somewhere else or they interviewed somewhere else, but they found that for a lot of different reasons, your organization was the right fit for them. You need to find more of those, but be clear about what you do offer, especially as you evolve as organizations, and the talent that you continue to bring in influences that employer brand situation. But definitely do not be fooled to think that just because somebody is going to an Ivy League school that you need to go to too. So be pragmatic and be realistic. I do want to emphasize that how you choose the criteria and how you weight the criteria is your call. Nobody is in a better place than a lot of people on this call to evaluate those two elements in consultation with the wider organization, especially the key dependent stakeholders in your business. They have to be brought on the journey, but really it is your call as an organization, and we can help facilitate that by being impartial. Yeah, I can't really emphasize enough, it is know your employer value proposition. The experience that candidates have, as I'm sure you're all aware, is so critical. The interpersonal interaction, the recruitment experience, from that first either invitation, personalized email you send to make them aware of who you are, to that kind of bringing them into your organization and see who you are, making sure that that is absolutely authentic and credible and differentiating, so that they get inspired by who you are as a business, because you've all done it. Nobody here has not done this in some shape or form, but you do have to know it. So I hope everyone has an EVP. If you do not, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to discuss it with you. But that's very, very critical and tantamount in your success, especially as things get more competitive and your ROI question becomes more pivotal. Having a clear EVP will help complement and drive better return, because you'll be more articulate and you'll have a very clear experiential process mapped out for how you want to resonate with the different talent populations and profiles you've identified. And last but not least, do not forget social. As my colleague here in the digital space, he reminds me day in, day out that social is just going to explode. And if companies are not actively working, leveraging that with purpose, with really resonant content, you're going to be at a state of disadvantage against some of your competitor peers. So I encourage you all to investigate the area, and if you do not have a presence, make sure that you do evaluate, do an audit, but also if you want to speak to us, we can help drive the content that will sink very much into your EVP proposition so that there's consistency and deliberate approach to how you're going to engage and differentiate yourself in the world of social. So do not forget that. So before I conclude, I wanted to pass it back to Kat.
Thanks, Paul. So we just have a couple more, just two quick feedback questions for everyone on the line. Just really helpful for us as we are evaluating these webinars, if the content has been helpful, relevant for you. So you should see that question pop up, and this we won't share, so feel free to be honest. Just really helpful for us as we're kind of evaluating going forward. I also wanted to point out, so a couple of questions came in during the webinar. The number one has been if the content will be available afterwards. So yeah, I just wanted to confirm that we are recording right now and we can make this content available. If you're on the line, we'll have your email address. So just expect a follow-up email in the next couple of days with the recording. So it looks like just about half of you have voted. We will give it a couple more seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. And just before everybody drops off, if there are any questions that you have, I'd be more than happy to stay on the line and answer those. I appreciate that we probably went slightly above the 35, 40 minutes, but hopefully you found the content valuable. But definitely keen to take any questions if there are some out there.
Close this poll. And then just one last quick question is if you'd be interested in learning more. So I know there's a lot of information shared, a lot of numbers. If you'd like to have a follow-up, with more specific information, Paul will be available or someone from our team to do that. So you just let us know. Paul, there was just a question, it looks like it came in about that university data and what year that was from. I think you said 2013, but just confirm that if you can.
Yeah, completions in 2013, yeah.
Okay. All right. Looks like the majority of people have voted, so I'm going to close the poll now.
And thank you so much for voting there. We really do appreciate it. It just helps us improve what we do and hopefully help improve what we can deliver to you going forward.
Yep, and it looks like, we're just about at time. Like Paul said, if there are any lingering questions, we'll stay on for a couple seconds. But otherwise, thanks for everyone who has joined, and just look out for that follow-up email. Paul, looks like there was a question, I don't know if you can see these, but if there are any analytical tools that you'd recommend as people start looking at the data and measuring school information?
Look, it's a good question. From what I've seen, most things tend to be probably custom built using some, visual interface over Excel. So it's definitely something that we're also exploring in terms of having a nice integrated tool. I don't think one exists right now that fuses both together. But happy to take any feedback from the group here if you've seen anything that would be useful, or if anybody has some feedback on the line that we'll be able to share with you. We would really appreciate that. Sorry about that, but we typically do a lot of work in Excel, obviously, as you can imagine, trying to synthesize the data and building some hopefully succinct outputs that you can then leverage internally.
Okay, I'm just looking through. It looks like we've answered a lot of these throughout. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can wrap up. And if so, like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email. So if you do have any questions that arise after you hang up, feel free to just get in touch with us that way. And Paul will be available, or me, or someone from our team to answer any questions that come up. Paul, do you have anything? Any last words here?
No, I just want to say very much thank you for bearing with me. I know that it's hard to sit through 50 minutes of me speaking, so thank you for your time. Hopefully you did find something of value in the content, and if you do have any follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to spend any time you need talking through. So thank you very much.
Great. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.